Hey everyone, welcome to another That's Initiative, Dungeons and Dragons and other fantasy role playing game podcast. I'm your host, Chris. Joining me as always, my co host, Greg. Hi, Greg.
Hello, all. Hello.
So, we're episode 5. We're chugging along nicely. I thought we'd get bored after 2 episodes and just move on with life, but we keep coming back, so we should be okay. Uh, for this episode, we're going to be talking about is Dungeons and Dragons a fantasy combat simulator? And looking at how it structures the game, how we feel it plays better, where you get your enjoyment whilst playing it, and a couple of topics like that, and then we'll move on to leveling based games, XP, how all of that works, and how it can all that ties together. So, do you have any initial thoughts on that topic?
Uh, is it a combat simulator? Well, maybe you should define that. What do you mean by a combat simulator?
So, if you're playing a game where you're gonna be basically the old dungeon crawl stuff where you're getting thrown in. It's like I'm going to play a guy who swings a sword at people, or I'm going to be a wizard who blasts people with spells.
Sure.
And when you look at it as a game and you come at it as a player, how you structure it in your mind, like is that where your focus is, or do you look to build a character?
Like the computer game that you hit the space bar to skip over all the dialogue and you just want to get to the fighty bits.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
are we playing Diablo on the tabletop?
I think there probably is that percentage of people that is the way that their game is structured mainly around combat. Um, I kind of feel like there's a number. As a game master, you're presenting dilemmas, and one of the resolutions is combat, and one is diplomacy, and one is skill checks, and one is. So, are they any different? The players, the option is ultimately left with the players how they choose to resolve it. So, if they want to run around smoking everything, well, then that's kind of their choice. Then they're getting the game that they want,
Yeah.
right?
So when you're playing as a player, where do you focus on? Obviously, you have your elf chick with bow archetype that you enjoy the most. But
I do.
when you're structuring those characters and building them, do you come at it from the combat stat side of it? Like once I hit this level, I'll be able to do these attacks, or do you? Or I suppose the best way to do is tap into my experience as well here. But personally, I don't really look at the rules for what my abilities are going to do and how it's going to affect the combats. I always think of the story for my character and where I would like it to take them. I think it comes from more of my background playing a different style of game. So I don't know how you approach it.
Yeah, I don't really worry too much about. I mean, if I decide I want to play like a melee character or a range character or spellcaster, then I will consider which class I think best suits the character that I had envisioned. But I generally have some sort of overarching idea of what I want to do with the character. So I want to play a range character. I I probably am not going to play a rogue or something in D&D, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
could, but I'm probably going to play something that's going to be structured rules wise more towards, some of the abilities that they gain as they progress are going to augment my range attacks and stuff like that, just so I'm not under optimized.
yeah,
I'm not totally concerned with being super optimized. I just want to be competent in what I'm trying to achieve.
yeah. And I say all of that and talk about how I like to tell the story of my character and let that sort of develop and focus more on that side of the game. But equally, when I rolled up my latest character, I did dump the 20 into my strength
You did.
and made him a very hitty cleric. But I I justify it to myself that that's the story of the character and that's what he does. But I
Well, I
don't know
think
how. I
I
don't.
think if you were trying to optimize your dude, you would have picked a paladin. So
Yeah,
you clearly did have a vision for the character, right?
yeah,
Um, so, well, you did structure it that way. It wasn't over optimized. Otherwise, you would have, if we were playing in a min max game, you would have definitely played a paladin instead of a cleric.
Yeah. So when you're actually talk about when we're actually on the table playing the game now, I know that both of us, I think, enjoy the tactical side of the game and in the combat and trying to make the correct decisions and like the positioning of the game and moving your pieces around the board as it goes. Like, how do you think D&D works as a combat simulator in that sense?
I think it's adequate. The application, like the decision to use the map, I guess, should be decided whether what type of players you have. If you're playing with your family and they're going to be it's going to be more story driven and stuff like that. The people you're playing with are not they don't care if you use miniatures, all those things. Then you could do it theater of the mind. I think that the using the map, there's less ambiguity. When I draw the map out and I put a monster there and your characters are there, there's no like, well, I thought when you said where the monster was that he was here. They're just you that becomes less of an issue. Um, and I think it adds an aesthetic to the game, even though for the most part my miniatures aren't painted unless you've painted them yet.
uh,
Um,
so I think I'm the only person for all our games who turns up to like session one with a painted character.
oh, I would say that's a guarantee.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's what drives your character creation
yeah.
is finding a miniature, and
I'm very
it's
I'm
all
very tactile and visual in it. I like to see my character, and that's I I think the first time we found a pelt, I was like, I'm taking that. I'm going to get that made into this robe here because
so
it
it looks
fits on my character.
that's right. So it looks like my miniature.
Yeah, so I want what's in my imagination to fit what's on the table. But yeah,
So as far as being a good combat simulator, it I think it generalizes combat. Uh, the whole let's make a dice roll, and it's going to encompass all the activities that your character does in the phase of the round. So it's not a I swing at you and you parry me. It in that it's not a simulation, but it's just it represents the sort of sword play and all that other stuff. There's so many generalities in the game, like hit points clearly are not like your 10th level character and the peasant boy have the same can take roughly the same amount of physical damage before, like if someone stabs you with a sword, you're both dead,
yeah,
right? But hit points, they've come up with this system to generalize, how much you can defend yourself, how your endurance in combat, and so forth. So, I mean, the nature of the system does not lend it to being a simulation of combat. There's many other systems that are far more complicated.
yeah,
And I mean, now I'd say the current wave of games, people have just accepted that we are going to make that's probably the better way to term it is combat resolution. We're going to make a resolution die roll, and it's going to determine who gains the advantage between you and your opponent and whether you inflict some sort of wound to him, whether it just be like a glancing wound or a more serious wound or whatever. Whereas many of the old school games, because the early D&D players were mostly wargamers, there was a lot of those, uh, rollmaster type games where every weapon had its own chart and there were 20 different armor classes representing, whether your breastplate had leggings or bracers or whether you were wearing a helm. And there were, you'd roll percentage and there's all these humongous tables and, fighting two orcs would take 3 hours. And so I
yeah,
think at the expense of expediency, we end up with a system now that resolves the conflict, right? Just like if you're making a perception check or a survival check or whatever, the combat resolves it, and you end up with an answer to
yeah.
whatever it is you were trying to do. So yeah, and I think that's convenient.
Yeah, I definitely think for myself anyway, that obviously the title of the episode's kind of misleading, and it leads it's more to branch out into the other subjects we're going to touch on.
Sure.
But for me, D&D is definitely a fantasy combat game. I don't know that it's a good simulation of a fantasy combat. I always term it in my head as the same way I used to talk to people about Flames of War when they talk about the different range bands and how artillery shouldn't even be on a table if you're playing at 15 millimeters and all of that kind of stuff. It's like, well, you are correct if Flames of War was supposed to be a simulation, but it's not. It's a game. You have the level of abstract to make the game more fun, and I think Fifth Ed D&D does a really good job of making the game more fun and making that
For sure.
combat engaging enough and challenging enough that you can have tactical situations on the map, but it's definitely gamey tactical
Oh, absolutely.
moves. You are playing the game. At that point, you're not like moving around and trying to think of the best actions that your character would do. Were you role playing, like were you larping the character or in an actual simulation? You'll do things in D&D that don't make sense for that because the game says that you will get an advantage.
Yeah, and I mean, over the course of the history of tabletop role playing, that certainly has been a complaint. People have said in the past and even now, right, that well, that's not the way it would happen. Why does my guy who's wearing plate mail like have the same speed as the dude who's wearing nothing, right? Like the the amount of weight you're carrying should reduce your, and I'm like, I think we, we're getting to into the minutia. We're just trying to tell a story, and we're looking for expedient resolution for the different challenges we put in front of the players, so that we can move on and do other things. We've played in games where combat went on and on and on and on and on, and uh, a level-based game. I mean, I know where this is where we're going to head later,
Yeah,
but a level-based game is driven by combat generally because unless the game master awards an equal amount of experience for any type of challenge. So, when you go out in the forest and you look for tracks of the adversary you're following, the game, and you make a successful skill check and you find the tracks, the game master goes, "Oh, you get 100 XP." Or you're negotiating in town and you want to get a better price for the armor that you're trying to sell back to the merchant, and you win the sort of persuasion trade. Oh, you get 100 XP. That is the I would say that is not the way most people play Dungeons and Dragons. That all occurs within the session, and then they run around like murder hobos and they smoke stuff and get experience and treasure so
yeah.
that they get more powerful so that they can beat up other things and get their treasure. And yeah, so I think you, as a game master, you try to present it so that that isn't the all encompassing. So your game isn't just fight, 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 fight. Because
Yeah.
not everybody likes. There's people that enjoy the fight, fight. And those are the people that are playing Dungeon of the Mad Mage, right? Which is just 16. The whole module or the book is a 16 level dungeon crawl,
Yeah.
right? That I think when you're younger, maybe that's a generalization. And it's all about, my character's got this and my character's got that. So it's less about telling your character's story and more about how your character is able to beat things up.
Yeah.
Then dungeon crawl seems awesome. And I mean, occasional dungeon crawl is kind of cool, but because I mean, it is the essence of the most risk yielding the potentially greatest reward.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I just think that as the game has evolved, Dragonlance would probably be the point, in the mid history of the game, or the early mid history, where the game just became less about crawling around in caves and dungeons and old stuff and, like old abandoned ruins and looking for loot and murdering whatever lived there. And, the whole, we've talked about this Colville, you start at the dungeon,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that. D&D is a nice common ground.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. It leads us on to the next part of the topic, which was going to look at obviously when you're doing a lot of combat, that tends to gear yourself towards playing in an XP reward into leveling kind of game, which I feel like, especially Fifth Ed, is designed around. They do present alternatives to it, but I think most players, I feel, would be playing in a an XP per session. Like you, if you beat this encounter, you are going to earn this much XP type game.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's the what is it called? The waypoint? No, it's something like that. With the new XP system where you know you level, the game master decides you guys are going to go up after 3 sessions.
Yeah,
So nobody. That's I think the players like getting the reward of saying, "Hey, you got 100 XP," or "Hey, you got 500 XP," or something like that. The players are like, "Ooh, cool," and they're like excitedly write it down and calculate how far they have to go to their next level. The game master is just this is just such a pain to go through and keep track of all the monsters they fought and all the stuff they did. And would I be better just to lump sum, give them a random amount of XP, right? And I think that the waypoint system or the benchmark or whatever you want to call it is a I don't want to call it a lazy game master's tool, but it's just it, it's there so that the game master doesn't need to worry about it. He's just like, we're on the third session, so you guys level, you know.
so I don't know that I've played in that style of game. Maybe Daniel's game was that style of XP leveling, but I always feel like every game, no matter how you do it, it that is what happens. As the game, I think we touched on this a while ago, but if I want you to be level 3 by the fourth session, magically you'll have the encounters to get you to level 3 by that session.
Right,
Equally, you could have had any encounters, and then I tell you that you've made level 3 now.
right. And I
None of
mean,
it.
the dilemma is that is what we talked about with the monetizing, right? Where uh, if you are going to give experience for monsters killed, so if you have an encounter and the players kill monsters, and when they take their rest, you give them a certain amount of XP. I think you do need to, if you want to incentivize them to do other things than just run around killing things, you need to incentivize their other activities and like successful resolution of their so-called quests and stuff like that with XP bonuses. That so they realize that I'm still going to get XP if I take the more pacifistic route of resolving the dilemma, right? If we sneak around the monsters and climb over the wall rather than burst through the front gate, we're still going to end up getting the same amount of XP at the end of the adventure.
Yeah.
I think that's important because I don't know how many times, the game master says to the players, well, how much XP do you guys need till you're level 4? And they go 100. And then they're like, oh, well, we just, go out and kill a cow or something like that so that we can get some XP, right? That you end up with this absurdity.
And that's the thing that bothers me as the style of player I am. I don't want to do gratuitous things to level. I want it to feel natural as my character develops and gets better. Which is why I like the milestone system
That's what it's
for
called. Yeah, yeah.
it. Just being able to not have, because for me, if you're doing a milestone game, you just don't have to worry about leveling at all. Your character is going to level at the pace that they level, and it's not relevant. And it goes well into looking at the other style of games as well. So I didn't know if you've got any more points on that briefly before we touch on a couple of the other styles, like the career systems in a couple of the other games and that kind of
No,
thing.
that's
But
okay.
if you've got any more points on XP versus milestone in 5e,
No, just what we just said. Sort of, if you're going to use individual XP awards, you need to award XP for all the different activities that the players do, and it needs to be balanced. Like I said, you can't. You have to. They have to get the same amount of experience for avoiding combat as they do for like charging through. Otherwise, they're always going to pick the more profitable option, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't mind the milestone system. Um, it just sometimes feels um,
I think the execution of it is what's important. Like if you if you sit around not doing anything and and then you've suddenly gone from third to fifth level in 2 sessions, you know it's because your DM's like scrambling because something's big is coming, and it
right,
can kind of jar you out of the Steel Colville's favorite word, the verisimilitude of the campaign.
right,
But equally, I like when he talks about uh, the characters. Whilst they won't understand, I go out, I hit this rat, I gain 5 XP. I go out, I hit this other rat, I gain 5 XP. Once I've killed 100 rats, I level. Whilst the character might not understand that, they would understand that the more they go and do stuff and fight things, the better they get.
right.
It's a natural progression of the more you do something, the better you'll get at it, which ties well into the other type of games we've been playing recently. Obviously, we've both been playing some Call of Cthulhu, 7th edition, where that I think's an interesting take on. It's not really leveling; it's just character development for me. Your characters don't level up; they just evolve, and as you take a test, if you succeed, you put a check mark in, and then every time everything you've succeeded in, you'll get a little bit better at. And the more you're forced into taking these tests, or the more you force your character to take these tests, the higher percentage chance you've got of succeeding. So the higher percentage chance you've got of getting better at it.
Yeah,
So
and then the game master also doesn't have to worry about. I mean, they have to worry about making sure there's a well-rounded selection of tests so that skills that the players may have that they want to level, like that they want to improve, the opportunity exists for them to use those skills in the scenario, right? So if they want to get, like in Call of Cthulhu, if they want to improve their library use, then it's up to them to go and use that skill so that they can potentially get a skill check, so that they can then get their check mark, so that they can progress in the skill, right?
yeah,
I think the opportunity needs to exist.
yeah,
Yeah, I like that system, and I mean it's self-policing in that you're uh, limited by, after you've got your check mark, when you're checking to see if you get an improvement, the higher your skill is, you have to roll above your skill. So when your skill is terrible, the likelihood of you getting an improvement is large. As you get better, the likelihood of your improvement is less, right? So
yeah.
it's sort of
It self balances, I
it
think.
self balances. Yeah, no, and that's good. That's a one of the better sort of we'll call it the maybe experienced character. So
Yeah,
your character starts off with a history, whereas like in D&D and games like that are level driven, for the most part, your character is like some 16, 17-year-old peasant boy that starts in the village. Um, some people like the idea of them being the one that experienced everything that their character experienced,
yeah,
rather than them starting their character at point X and them everything that happened before X, like the stuff that you accumulated through character generation, they they didn't have anything to do with that. I mean, they can write it into a backstory. So if the game master is really keen on using backstories and stuff like that, that's the player's opportunity to explain to the game or to the other players and the game master, this is who my character was leading up to the point where the campaign began.
yeah,
So I think that's kind of important, right, in a game of that nature.
yeah. And I suppose when I'm playing, I find it ultimately D&D. All of it is in your head. None of it's real. So
Really?
I hate to break. That's it. We've lost all of the listeners. That's it. The show's over.
That's right. We might
Um,
as well just shut it down now.
but I. This might sound weird, and I might be relatively unique in this, but when I'm playing a character, I try to get into it. I try to play the character, and I try to shift into. being them and acting as them and doing that. And it's not necessarily doing voices and like getting up and acting out reactions or anything like that, but just the choices I make. I don't always make the choice to do what Kris wants to do. I'll try and do what Conrad would want to do. And whilst doing that at the table is obviously fun and entertaining part of playing the game, the choices that Conrad made before the game started apply just as much to me playing that character. So I I understand your point and what you're saying that obviously when you play people don't like playing an older character. I think Conrad's like 30, 32, something like that, I think.
Sure.
Is an older guy, is had life experience. It's been a dull and boring life,
Right.
but that's what's driven him to the place he is. And I get the attraction of playing the, the typical 15-year-old boy who finds the sword of power, you know, goes and saves the world. But if I was playing in that game, I would find it very difficult to not just play it the same way every time, no matter what the game was. Right?
Right. Well, I mean,
Because
that's the essence of role play, isn't it? How everyone inhabits their character. Like you said, some people, they need a voice or they need something to push them into the character, right? Some people, because it's not just you trying to be consistent. So you have these sort of like internalized alternative values that you've assessed to this character. How does my character feel about? So I think if you had a newer player, that's what they struggle with because they don't understand the how. Look, not everybody, but some of them don't understand how to differentiate. So when you inevitably end up with new players in your game, a lot of them are, you know, Tom. Tom is the character Tom plays has the same mindset of Tom. So,
yeah,
I mean, as a game master, when I had new players, often I'd hand out a questionnaire, right? Like, how does your character feel about this stuff? And then I would just say, just like 10 or 15 questions. And then I'm like, if you ever struggle with remembering that, Kris is Kris and Conrad is Conrad, then like look at the value that you wrote down. And I think so early on, that's what alignment was all about.
yeah,
So they wanted an all-encompassing thing, and they sort of said, "Oh well, my dude is going to be evil, so I'm going to make him lawful evil." Well, so when I see lawful evil at the top of my character sheet, it throws me to this mindset that my guy isn't me, and that he's going to react differently.
yeah. I think naturally your character will develop over time, especially when you're playing them in this kind of system. But I don't know that very well. I suppose the no, how am I going to do? I'm going to have to edit an hour. But well, the first couple of times playing your character is going to be more you and less the character. And as you play it more, the character, I find anyway, pushes your choices out and takes over the game, and your character plays the game, and that's where I get the enjoyment of it. I get the fun of it, and that's a large part of playing role playing games, and it does tie well into what I wanted to make the point of when we talk about we were talking about the developed characters and the career systems of like Warhammer, for example, has got a career based system. You don't really have levels, but the leveling and the XP driven games, personally, I look at them as more of a long term investment in a character that I will take them from X level through to Y level, and they will grow and do these things. Whereas in for these other games that tend to favor more career or milestone kind of stuff, I see it more as the mid to short term games. I, I I would have more fun playing that kind of stuff where the end game payoff isn't, I'm not going to be an all conquering hero with world renowned fame for my strength at arms, but I get to accomplish other goals and play in different ways. So I don't know how you think about it. Like, what
So I
kind of
think,
system do you think works better for what type of game?
um, well, so like to the point you made just previously was, I think it all revolves around how complete your vision is of your character. Sometimes you come to the table, you're like, hey, we're going to play Call of Cthulhu this week. We're going to make characters. We sit down, we make characters. And in that instance, you might not have a very complete idea of who you want your character to be. Like you said, through the course of experience things in the game, the character ends up defining itself. The if we I sort of hand you a campaign proposal and say we're going to start playing in 4 weeks. You have 4 weeks to think about who you want your character to be. So when we play the first session, even though that's the day that we're just rolling stats, you have a much clearer, more concise idea of who your character is going to be because you've had a fair bit of time to think about it and, write your backstory and talk about the things that your character's experienced and it's defined your character. So as far as the game system, like the career thing, I think even with D&D, a majority of campaigns run out of steam. So they get to like 7 or 8 in a majority of games that people play, and through no fault of anybody's, the game just sort of either runs its course or it just runs out of steam. So that's very similar to that career system, right? Where your character never really gets to achieve the level of notoriety of being 10th or 12th or 15th level and is the most famous swordsman in the land or the, great sorcerer from this area or something like that. So you end up with a very sort of more, what they would call in D&D terms, tier one. It's very similar to the Warhammer the career system where you just have some dude and he's had some adventures, but really he's just still some dude from Castlebridge or whatever. Um, yeah, and so I think either one of those is good. D&D, well, I can't say that I've played. I mean, I've played a fair bit of Warhammer, but I've never played to the end, sort of like where your character has done everything. You've checked all the boxes you want to check for character development, and your character's on like their third class or whatever. Yeah, that may turn out to be the same as being 15th level in D&D,
Yeah,
right? Because you're not. All that Warhammer has done is given you uh, experience to buy specific improvements, where D&D has put you on a curve where you're earning experience and unlocking improvements along the way. So
yeah.
really, there's no. I don't know how you feel, but I don't really feel like there's a huge difference. Uh, it comes down to the way the game master runs their game, right? Like if I said in my game, everybody is going to start off with a trade skill, and that's what you did before circumstances caused so you're Gendry from Game of Thrones, and you work in a blacksmith shop, and some dude comes along and says, "Hey, somebody's looking for you," and the story starts, and then you have to react, and maybe you don't end up staying working in the blacksmith shop.
Yeah.
Is that any different in the Warhammer system as it is in the D&D system? It really comes down to the way the game master chooses to tell the story.
No, and one thing I have thought about, um, so this isn't a negative. I'm not trying to call a guy out, but running when I ran Warhammer for you and Daniel, one of Daniel's complaints was obviously, and we've spoke about it separately, was that it didn't feel like the character leveled up. And it's like, well, you don't level up. You're naturally getting better after every session. Every session you were at least getting to level up one
Well, we were
skill or
getting
one
we were
ability.
getting some experience, yeah, and you've got to be far more specific in where you chose that upgrade. So if you felt like you wanted to be better at combat, you would put it in combat skills. If you felt like, oh, we seem to be doing a lot of negotiation and diplomacy and stuff like that, I want to improve my charisma because in Warhammer you could improve your statistics as well,
Yeah,
right? Not just your skills. Just so your character development was totally open as far as where you choose to spend that experience. But he didn't see.
I think he was used to the payoff of leveling in D&D,
Yeah,
where you in D&D you level, you get this bonus, you get this, and it's all nice and defined. And I thought about it and I was like, well, rather than doing this, why don't I just hold back all the XP and then just give it you in a chunk? So okay, you've now got 1,000 XP.
yeah.
So you can bang like 3 lots into your weapon skill and go up 15%. And then you're like, whoa, this guy's awesome now. And I feel like that kind of shifts it in a similar kind of feel. And I think you can do the same kind of thing with D&D if you don't like the feel of leveling that way. I don't know if there's anything wrong with evolving the skills. And I remember you talking about a game where your paladin wanted to discover his powers naturally,
Yeah,
and like just because he's leveled up doesn't mean that he knows how to use the next ability that he's gonna get.
until it reveals itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that was Edward's character in my Curse of Strahd game. He was playing his paladin, and he said to me at the very beginning of the game, "I want to have my skills sort of manifest themselves organically." And I was like, "Okay, so I just have to find a way to integrate, it into the system to when we're playing, right? When you take damage, your wounds heal, and that's now that your lay on hand has manifested itself, you have the option of using it when you choose, right?
yeah,
Yeah, well, that
but
was kind of cool.
and that's I think that's really interesting when you look at it that way. That it kind of takes away from that chasing the XP. If the if the abilities are going to manifest, and I've done it a lot with magic items where they grow and unlock abilities, and I think that's a common thing that lots of people
Yeah,
will
like
recognize.
legacy weapons. Yeah.
Yeah, but doing it with your actual innate abilities. So we'll take right,
So
a
I mean,
roll.
back to the thing with it. I think Daniel's issue was that he was unsatisfied with the state of his character. He
Yeah,
wanted his character he wanted to start that game. We're talking in D&D terms. He wanted to start that game. His vision of who he wanted his character to be was some seventh level guy, and we were first level, right? So rather than being content with your character as where it stands, he had all these things that he wanted his character to be able to do to match up with his vision of who the character was, and that's why he was dissatisfied with
oh yeah,
the state of where it was, right? Whereas, like, I recognized that I had a finite number of points I could spend on my character, and I've always said this, it's easier to get away with role playing through social interaction, and so you might not have the skills or the stats, like that's like saying like every player character should have a 16 charisma because everybody plays their characters like they have a 16 charisma, right? No, when they dump stat it and they put an 8 in their charisma, that you don't see them like snapping at people, and just that's not the way it works, and so
well, I think I do a relatively good job of being a dick sometimes.
they can't fudge combat because
Yeah,
it's set out, right? You're rolling. There's like, you've got certain bonuses and thresholds and all the stuff, but they certainly can fudge the role playing side of things. So I mean, if you were lots of times when you're making a character in a system like Warhammer, you may tend to spend your points, even in Call of Cthulhu, you tend to spend your points in things that you can't fudge, and
so
then you eventually develop your character so that your character actually meets your expectations as you gain experience, right?
that rolls it nicely back into a main question of because of the nature of these games that we play, and obviously the combat rules being so defined and stringently laid out in the book, you're forced into the stats that you put into anything to do with combat are going to be fixed. And as you said, do you not think that it then puts not pressure but like the onus on the DM to enforce these things? That does if you role play your character as if you had a 16 charisma, in your the way I would treat that as a DM is in your head you said that exactly how you thought as your character, but what the words that came out of your character's mouth
Oh
might have
no.
been a little bit more bumbling and like you spat all over a guy as you were speaking all of it, and you've got to take all of that into account because
And it works both ways because there's
yeah,
people that have a 20 charisma and you tell them, hey, tell me what you're going to say to this guy. And then they're like,
yeah,
I mean, obviously, that's not the
the
20
player
charisma.
doesn't have a 20 charisma.
The player doesn't have a 20 charisma. So, I mean, it works both ways.
Yeah,
I don't really worry about that so much because you're not, you want the character to have, you want him to have fun, right? And, uh, yeah. And so I think that is where the game master sort of steps in. And like you said, uh, I'm like, hey, what's your bonus? Okay, my bonus is +3 for persuasion. Okay, tell me what you're going to say, right?
yeah,
I want to get away as a game master from rolling the dice to resolve everything because then then we're getting to the stage where if you roll poorly and I want to give you information, I can't, right?
yeah,
So I would rather just have the table talk occur and then let me modify the magnitude of the information or whatever the level, what you get back from me based on what your modifier is, rather than just randomly rolling dice, and because that makes the table more active, which is going to draw more people into the game and so forth, right?
so do you not worry that that does enforce that circle of all of my non-combat stats are going to be dump stats, and then I can focus on the combat, which brings it, a circular argument that you end up having just combat-based games because everyone's focused on combat because they didn't need the role playing stats because they just role played.
Yeah, I think if you find yourself in a group like that and you're a game master and that's not the game you want to run, then you put in a number of encounters. I mean, that's D&D's failing. Like, let's be honest. That's D&D's failing in that once your character starts, you you gain new abilities, but it's very hard for you to like, I mean, learn new skills, change your, like, I mean, you can choose to put your stats in, but if you've gone and dump statted and given yourself 8 charisma, no amount of putting stats into charisma is going to get your charisma to any point where, right, where it's going to be, you might get it out of the point where it's penalizing you, but you're rarely going to get to the point where it's benefiting you,
Yeah.
right?
And I have to be honest, I've been a really big fan of the games I've played in that you've ran where the characters you get to generate with the stat box you present or the role options you give us, they're always above average.
Yeah.
And I mean,
And
I'll
that's
let
why. And that's why, right? Because I don't want people, because inevitably they never ever role play the 8 intelligence or the 8 constitution or the 8 charisma, that, or like that's just, that also makes their character in their mind maybe seem less heroic, or that yeah. And I mean, I just assume if that's the game I'm trying to present is a sort of a hero based game, that the characters are above average.
yeah. And I've always enjoyed that aspect of it. I think my lowest stat for Conrad is a 12, I think.
Sure.
And so the thing he's worst at, he's still above average at. It's still a
Yeah.
+1. And
Yeah.
I try not to take advantage of that as a player, but for me, it does free up for me to play in the way that I wanted to play in. And I think there's always going to be scope for having fun playing a stupid character or a really charming character and using them all properly. And I think D&D, especially as the game's grown, has done a good job of, you know, different classes enforce different saves on the abilities and the spells so that it's not necessarily a dump stat all of the time. So you will have someone who's got a high charisma because all of their abilities use charisma, and especially the actual saving throws as well. I think there's a good balance for D&D now. But I do agree that in the old days you could get away with it more, maybe.
Well, I think what they've tried to do is make the game more accessible. So they've quantitative like all the checks by giving you like numbers, thresholds. So that a new game master or a new player has a definition of what the character can and cannot do based on their skills and their stats and so forth. They can look at their character and go, my character is strong, so I'm good at strong things. My character is not very agile, so I'm maybe a clumsy. My character is smart but not wise. My character is got a high charisma, but like what and the only issue is the more you play, the more that becomes a fence, right? Where players begin to define not what their character can't, like what they can't do, but rather you want them, so you want them to think outside the box. They look and they say, "Hey, my strength is this. It says that my long jump is 18 feet. I can't jump openings." So, the character comes to a pit in the middle of 4 in a dungeon, and you say it looks like it's about 20 feet. And they don't even try to jump across it because in their mind, their character, the rules say their character can jump 18 feet,
Yeah,
right? And you're like, you you want to reward them for, like, if you want to be a hero, play a hero, climb up on the roof, jump off. Yes, you could miss when you came death from aboving down on the monster with your sword, but you could hit, right? And you give the characters inspiration points and tools so that at that crucial moment when they're when the character whips by the monster and misses and impacts on the ground, right? They can change their destiny with their inspiration points or what some mechanism so that they can make their character succeed at that sort of dramatic moment.
yeah.
And then they're like, woohoo. And I mean that's what you want. You want the woohoo from the player because you don't want the oh my god. Like, we played a couple sessions with our current group and one of the guys just kept missing,
Yeah,
right? And you could see his frustration growing. And for some people that wouldn't be frustrating because they realize at some point their dice are going to turn around and like whatever. But at that particular point, he was feeling like he wasn't contributing or his character was unheroic or whatever, right? And some people, some players are more susceptible to that.
I think this is actually a good tip to take away for people in general, because I know that a few people we've played with have had this experience. And whilst I get frustrated when my dice are cold, I never think that it never makes me think of my character any less. It, I think that I am being unlucky as a player and rolling badly.
No, exactly.
But the act of being heroic isn't necessarily succeeding in the action you're attempting. So if I'm stood in front of, well, a good example would have been Daniel's game. Was it the hill giants that were attacking, and I was playing an Eldritch Knight, and I was on one hit point, and I got healed back up to one hit point, and still stood my ground trying to
Yeah, the
fight
way
this
you
guy.
played your character didn't change because you had one hit point.
Yeah,
You were just
because
you were fighting like you were being you without taking into consideration the mechanical side of things, right? You were
yeah,
just playing your guy.
for him to be heroic, it doesn't matter if he succeeds or not. Like, if he died doing that because I rolled terribly,
Sure.
it doesn't matter because he had a heroic death. He went toe to toe with this hill giant thing and was hacking away whilst his friends escaped, and whatever happens in the scenario. But your character's failure in an action shouldn't affect. Yeah, it doesn't make your character a loser. It doesn't make
No,
you a loser.
no.
It's like a loser wouldn't
That's
attempt
the
to do it in the
random.
first place.
That's just the random nature of the game. You
Yeah,
can't really focus on it because there'll be days that you can't miss. So for every one of those days, there'll be days that you can't hit,
yeah.
right? And that's why I like, I mean, we haven't really looked at this as a topic, but I like the whole fame and fortune, hero points, inspiration. Let's give the players like a lucky resource I mean, and we were exposed to that in a previous game where one of the players rolled really poorly, so she chose to buy the luck
Feet,
feat.
yeah.
And that changed her whole perspective on the character. I don't know that her character was any more or less lucky after she had it, but she felt like she had this like reserve of luck that she could, that would take the edge off her success or failure, and it changed her whole mindset when she was like,
And that's what I think we've had a few people in our groups who I feel like they've had that mentality of their look at rolling the dice affects how they play their character.
right.
When I don't necessarily think that it should. Like the paladin should go and try and hit the biggest thing because I'm gonna roll. The character's never going
That's
to
why you
think.
picked to be a paladin.
Yeah, the character's never gonna think. "Oh, I'm not gonna bother gonna hit that thing, so I'm only gonna miss anyway."
Right.
The character's gonna think, "I'm gonna go and hit that thing because I'm gonna chop its head off and smite the crap out of it." And obviously, that's very hard and fast statement I just made. You can always have the reluctant hero. It's fun to play, but equally, your dice shouldn't change the way. If you're playing a reluctant hero and every time you're rolling, you're critting something, you should. If you let that change the character into the this is awesome. I don't even know why I bothered. I'm the best, you know.
That's right.
I'm the best warrior ever. If the character's character and personality is that they're a reluctant hero, it goes both ways.
Yeah, they would be more surprised with their success.
Yeah,
They'd be like, "Oh, I didn't realize that I was capable of that." Right? But it wouldn't be, well, now I'm the greatest swordsman in the realm,
yeah,
because that's just, yeah. And so that's what we're talking about with the whole idea of consistency, right? And so yeah, I mean, we're kind of getting off topic, but this whole thing it's super important that people just like go to the table, experience the game. Don't let, don't let your enjoyment of the game, the mechanical side of things, influence your enjoyment of the game.
yeah,
Embed yourself in the story that's being told and what your character's doing and all the stuff, right? And in your mind, your character's whipping their sword around and doing all this cool stuff. And I mean, that's that is, you're going to walk away with a big smile on your face from the session, and that's awesome, right? And games, level-based games, stuff like that, that is their failing, because, your monsters as you level do increase in magnitude, the likelihood of you epically failing diminishes.
yeah,
And I mean, 5e with the whole bounded accuracy and you hitting all the time and them balancing it on the hit point side of the monsters makes everybody generally more feel better. But yet, even in 5th edition, we experience players that miss from time to time. And now I mean, go back to play a 1st edition game. If you feel like 5e was bad, making you feel bad about your character, go back and play a 1st edition game where, like we experienced when you're playing Warhammer 2nd edition, you fail more than you succeed, and there's your saving throws don't represent you taking more or less damage. In 1st edition, you failed a poison saving throw, you died. You failed a death saving throw, you died. So the whole life of your character is on one single die roll, and there's no way to change it. And you roll, and like you need to roll higher than a 15 or a 16 or a 14. So the likelihood of you succeeding is monumental. The game, the 40-year-old game was super punishing,
yeah,
right? And people didn't get attached to their characters because you could go through 4 or 5 characters in a night, right?
yeah.
So I think that's the failing of the level-based game, is that uh, like it's just your character. I mean, it kind of is what it is, but you're just sort of. I, I could see people getting frustrated with the level-based game.
So I think one thing as well, to close out this part of the topic, would be obviously that when you do have these failures and stuff like that, you there's two ways of looking at it. It's like my character missed the monster. You can also have your character is fighting a monster that's good that it managed to dodge your hit.
Oh, for sure.
It's all about your
It's
mentality going
perception.
in,
It's
and
perception.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch because I know we've had like I can think like three players specifically that we've played with recently who have that kind of feel. Probably three or four, to be honest.
And if you have a player like that as a game master, make your combat more narrative.
Yeah,
When
and
they
then
succeed, you go, how did your blow land on this? The guy rolls a 20 and you're like, how did your blow land on
yeah,
the
you
monster?
you
Well,
do the Matt Mercer. How do you want to do this?
yeah,
And
exactly.
just steal a line. It's fine. But
Right? And the guy rolls and he's like, oh, I got a 7. He's like, well, this looked like the perfect strike. But at the very last minute, the monster ducks to the right and the blow goes. Then the player doesn't feel quite so bad about, they're like, oh, yeah. Like you said, now their perception of it is that I didn't fail, but the monster
succeeded. Yeah,
succeeded in evading me,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And
No,
that's it. It's just managing your table and being cognizant of that kind of thing. I think it's just a really good tip. Like we should probably do an entire show of like just tips and things to watch out for and how you can get around them. But I'm probably going to clip this part of the video anyway and do a shorter piece. But we'll try and get back on topic to generally like combat and how focused it is for D&D and how it affects the leveling game and the actual drive of the game. So we've basically covered all the main points I wanted to hit. One last thing was obviously um, what kind of drove me into thinking this would be an interesting topic was when we were talking and like we were looking at like meta stories and all the big things, and then getting weighed down in combat rather than developing the story. Because like we were chatting about it the other night, and we had the a third should be character development, a third should be story development, and a third should be combat. It's like, well, can combat not serve to develop a character and develop a story? Should combat not be only to develop a story? If you're just doing combat for the sake of leveling, is that changing the feel of the game? And any
when we
thoughts
were
on
talking
that?
about that, yeah, it was pace.
Yeah,
That's more what I meant when I said a third,
yeah,
story, a third interaction, and a third combat. It's not all going to be in blocks, but over the course of a 4-hour session, roughly 90 minutes or so of each, you're going to have 90 minutes worth of combat and 90 minutes worth of interaction and 90 minutes worth of like story actions, and combat takes place in that. And not every session, some sessions 3 hours combat, some sessions 3 hours role playing. It all depends where you are in the telling of the story, but you don't want, because everybody's looking for something different in the game. There's the people that want combat. There's the people that want role playing, and there's the people that want to know, you know, you're on the last episode of Game of Thrones for the season. They want to know what's going to happen next season. So they want to know. They want to see the story
yeah,
reveal itself, right? And so, yeah, I think that you want to mix up your sessions so that uh, it feels light and that people are everybody gets a little bit of what they want. I mean, that's more what I was trying to
yeah.
articulate when I
No,
was talking.
I get it. It's more of bringing it into that so I can lead into this point of like, how often do you think, or like, as a game master, how often do you put combat into a session or into your plan for a session just so that there is some combat? And
Never.
that is part of what D&D gets into, where it can feel like a fantasy combat simulator. Like I am just playing tabletop Diablo, is when you can't understand the reasoning behind this encounter.
The random encounter.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what. Yeah. So the random encounter. You're just wandering along a road, and the game master is rolling dice just to give you the implicit belief that there's jeopardy, right? If you want to make there feel jeopardy in your game, then put jeopardy in your game. If you want them to feel safe and secure, then let them feel safe and secure. I don't think you need to doctor things like you know uh sometimes, yeah, like that, but that's a throwback to the old days. I think now where the game is now, newer players won't even have experienced that codifying that the old game was, where you know every turn you were in the dungeon that you were like searching through a room, you rolled on the random encounter table to see if a monster wandered in on you, right? Because they felt like they needed to have rules because the game master, so to take the onus off the game master. Like
Yeah.
if we're in a dungeon and you guys are rummaging around in a room, or you're sitting in a room arguing about where you guys are going to go next. Should we go down the stairs or should we go explore the eastern wing of the dungeon or whatever, right? And I feel like now is a good time to change the pace of things. Then I'm going to put an encounter in. But old school, I think they felt like there needed, well, I mean, all you need to do is go back and look at older editions. There needed to be a rule for everything.
Yeah.
5e has replaced many of those with, a mechanic, right? Like if I'm standing not behind the mob, but to the left of the mob, then I get this bonus. And if I'm on this hill, I get this bonus. And, yeah, that doesn't need to, we realize the likelihood of the game master being able to memorize all that stuff, right? To be able to adjudicate situations where now we've replaced it with one simple, elegant mechanic.
Yeah.
It's too simple for some people. Some people are like, I liked it much better when, I could stand on a chair bouncing on one leg, being behind the mob, and I'd get all these crazy bonuses.
Yeah, I think that D&D definitely feels like a more elegant game than older editions and what I've been used to playing in the past. It definitely feels like a modern role playing game. There's definitely that like disconnect between mid to late 80s, early 90s games and then what we're getting now.
Yeah,
You
the
only have
old
to
old school games where there was just one big slap fight where we would just be swinging at each other,
yeah,
never hitting each other because our characters were raving incompetence, right?
yeah. No, I think that's a good thing. We're at about an hour now, so try and start wrapping it up. But have you got
Sure.
any other points you wanted to cover on the feel of D&D being driven by combat or leveling or any of the other topics we've touched on?
I just feel like that the tone of your game is set by the game master.
Yeah,
So if you know, if players feel like your game is combat driven, it probably is. If people feel like all we ever do is just sit around and talk to NPCs, it probably is, right? So that's a conscious something that you should be aware of as a game master, so that when you look at the composition, so you look at your notes and you're like, hey, what am I going to do in my next session, right? And all your notes are from one of the three categories. Then if you want to have some sort of dramatic ups and downs in your game, then you might want to intersperse it with some components from the other things, right? Um, Ultimately, depends on your players. Some of them like combat, so maybe you want to have a more combat-driven game. You can tell that by the characters that they've made,
yeah,
right? If they're all making barbarians and stuff like that, then they're probably looking, they're not looking to go to the coffee house and talk
yeah,
to the stuff like that, right? They're looking to go around and, you know, do their thing. And yeah, and so that comes with the game. That's the number one thing that the game master has to identify. What is each player in their game trying to get from the game, right? Is it just a social activity? Are they just trying to get together? Do they want to tell a story? Like Colville touched this, was really good on one of his things, right? Identifying the characteristics. Some players in your group don't engage with your game, no matter how much you try. And those are the spectator guys. They're quite content to come to your game, watch everything that goes on, feel like they're part of the team. If you ask them how they felt the last session went, their perception would, we did this and we did that, and it wouldn't be that Kris did this or so and so did that. It'd be we did this because they're content to be part of the team, right?
yeah,
And so there's all sorts of different characters, right? And if you have one player that tends to be more dominant, then you have to, as a game master, to keep that consistent tone, maybe be looking to the players that are not involved and prompting them, hey, what's your character doing? Hey, what's your character? Because I know when I'm playing in a game with you, I don't have to say that. You're going to tell me what you want your character to do. You don't require me to prompt you, but the character that tends to be more of a wallflower in the game, I need to constantly like look around the table and see how engaged they are with the game and be like, hey, what's your character want to do? Right?
And I think part of what I'm going to start doing is Conrad is going to start engaging with the other characters. Would you like to come and do this with me? Not, do you want your character to go there with my character?
Well, part of the
And
issue,
then,
and
I,
we've talked about this, right? Part of the issue that we've always faced is that we play this game that goes to seventh level and then the game shuts down,
yeah.
right? So lots of players never get to clearly define what it is they want to get out of their character. Their character's still in that building up phase before they get to the point where they're at the sort of like equilibrium phase where they're just like they've got what they kind of want, and now they're going off and doing what they want to do. Yeah, so that's the problem with a low level game, right?
So I did have one tip that I wanted to get your thoughts on that I think to try and avoid that combat simulator feel and that when you're running a campaign as the game master, if you don't want that to happen, I would say earlier on in your campaign, I think if you can give examples and like force it down your players' throats that fighting to the death doesn't necessarily have to be the only option. So have them be attacked by bandits, and then once a couple of bandits go down, and have them like really, really weak bandits, like make the heroes feel like heroes, so like one shotting them, and then have the bandits surrender, and then let them like the players can keep fighting if they like, but the bandits are trying to, they've thrown down the weapons and make it into a role play opportunity, and
Right,
then don't necessarily punish your players if they don't take you up on it, but the more you reinforce that it doesn't always have to be about combat, you can think your way out of these situations. You could try and you could throw down your weapon and make them think you've surrendered, and then blast them with a fireball. If there's multiple ways and means of doing things that can kind of change the dynamic of the game, but you have to show your players as a game master that these are things that you can do.
right, and keep reinforcing throughout that that there is no fence,
Yeah,
right? If you if you think I want my character to Legolas, I want to throw the shield and then slide down the stairs and shoot arrows and do whatever, then you know, then ask me, hey, if I throw the shield down and try to ride down the stairs, and I'll tell you the criteria to achieve what you want to do. And then you can make the decision. You need to make an acrobatics check, and you're going to have to make a dex check at the end to stay on. And then you're like, oh, well, my dex is 20 and my acrobatics skill is quite good. So I'm likely to succeed in this, right? So I'm going to do that. Or you're a swordsman and you're on a stairwell and you like look into the room and you see a big swarm of creatures and they come heading towards you and you're like, well, there's no way we're going to be able to fight all these, right? So I'm going to pour oil all over the stairs and then wait till they get close and throw a torch on them.
yeah,
Okay. And you want to encourage your players to think outside that because there's a swarm of creatures doesn't mean that they have to stab each creature to kill it. They can think outside the box and you reward them when they do and they're all like, hopefully they embrace that type of thing and because if that would be one of my complaints. I feel like we're at the stage now when we look at a game like D&D specifically that people feel like it's fencing, it's defining who their character is. Their stat block and all that stuff defines what their character is capable of, and they never try anything outside of that.
yeah. And I think that doing that kind of stuff that you're talking about actually changes 5e into a fantasy hero simulator, which is
Yeah,
what the game should be. And once you break free of those constraints that you feel like are on you, that it doesn't become a fancy combat simulator anymore, and your hero becomes a lot more dynamic and feels more alive and real because you're not constrained by this book.
Oh no, exactly. And you don't hear things at the table like, "Oh, we can't fight this swarm because we don't have any AA abilities." And you're just like, you, yes, you don't, but it doesn't mean that you guys can't figure out a way to deal with it,
Yeah.
right?
I think that's a good place to wrap that up. I think we've added little bits at the end. We did have some questions, so I'm probably going to try and collect a couple more because I think these are like they weren't quite big enough to be full topics, but we did have some comments on our Facebook page on Dice Hate Productions on Facebook. So we'll get to Greg Estevez and Sean Dorsey's questions on the next show. I'll try and get a couple more together, but I don't have anything to give away on this one because I didn't buy any more stuff yet. So I'm gonna give the Elber. So I will number Greg or Sean. So and then I'll find. Uh, do you have a coin? Can you flip a coin?
You know what we'll do? Because the two of them gave us questions,
Yeah.
I'll buy another one and we can give them each one.
Oh, okay. There you go. Well, so there you go, Greg and Sean. You both get an Elber, and I'll get those in the mail. So thanks everybody, and thanks Greg. It was interesting as always. Topics don't always go away. I think they're going to, but I think that was a good one. Covered what's the ground and had a slight tangent, which was informative. I think.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah.
We didn't end up at the fireball, so we're all good.
Oh, it's always in the back pocket.
That's right.
Yeah.
That'll be our anniversary show. When we get to episode 10 and we haven't done Fireball yet, we're doing Fireball.
Okay. Yeah, so if you enjoyed the show, make sure you leave some comments. And I do apologize for messing up the last YouTube video and not actually posting it. But the podcast seems to be going well. If you know anywhere where you can share this kind of content, because I'm terrible at doing this stuff and like social medias, but I'm trying to get better. But we think that we're enjoyable enough. I think there's some good info and tidbits in there. So let me know where you think we should be sharing it, any other formats you would like to see the show in, anywhere you want to be able to find it and can't, let me know. But you can reach out to us at info@dicehate.com. You can email there. You can go to our Facebook page, it's Dice Hate Productions on Facebook. And you can shoot me a DM on Twitter at Dice Hate Kris. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.